I cannot tell you how many times I start off the school year by asking this one question right here that I know is going to make my heart sink, but I still ask it nonetheless. And that question is, does anybody know what continent United States is on? And I get answers like this.
Oh, the continent is Africa.
Oh, it makes me want to cry hearing that. But being the teacher I am, I will double down and ask them another question. And that question is, can anybody point to where United States is on the map? And what do they say?
What map? What map?
If this conversation sounds even remotely familiar to you, then this video is for you. In this video, I'm going to share with you how I teach my students geography skills, at the same time tying that into United States history. But first, let me get out of the way so we can play that intro. My geography/intro to United States history is a 6-day unit in which I combine both together. And I use it to teach my students the basic map skills, and then use those map skills to look at how the United States began, starting all the way back from when mankind started in Africa, going forward all the way to the beginning of colonization. I do want to let you know that I'm going to offer this lesson on Teacher Paid Teacher, and I'll make sure to include a link in the description so you can get this lesson. But if I haven't included a link yet, what that means is I haven't put it up on that website yet. And if that's the case, just go ahead and click on the link below, send me an email, and I will send to you what I have so far regarding this lesson for free. So let's start how I'm going to organize each day of this unit plan. I always have something for my students to do when they first come into class. I call this my warm-up. You may call this your bell ringer or something else, but regardless of the name for it, it is essential that students have something to do when they first come into class. Let me give you an example one of my warm-up students will do when they come into class, and I'll explain a little bit more about it. At the very top says take out a blank piece of paper and tell it warm up 816 through 822. What I have students do is I have them hold on to this paper for the entire unit. And each day they come in, they'll add a little bit to it, and that's going to be their warm-ups. And now we have my warm-ups are set up Cornell note style. That's just how we do notes in here. So I just kind of use that style for the warm-up. And most Cornell notes have something called essential question, but since this is just the format we're using, there is no essential question for this. And then it gives them the directions of what they need to do. That's the geographical reasoning question on page 2. So on page 2, there's a map, and attached to that map are 2 questions. Now, my students have been practicing all last week. I used to spend about a week going over warm-up, so they know exactly what to do, so this is no surprise to them. And this warm-up should take them somewhere between 6 to 8 minutes. But here's the important part, and here's what happens next. I use this warm-up as a launching pad to the actual discussion that I want to have with my students. So the warm-up takes 6 to 8 minutes, and depending on how responsive my students are, discussion could take anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. But once we're done with the discussion, it's at that point in time students will work on the packet that has been assigned to them. Now the packet will probably take them about 10 minutes to complete that portion of the packet. I think it's like 6 pages, and each day we just do one portion of the packet. And then when students are done with the packet, if there's time left, which usually there is time left, they'll go ahead and move on to ed puzzles that are there to reinforce what we just learned that day. Now that we understand the big picture, let's break it down per day to see how we actually implement the plan.
Hey, who's ready for a great first day?
Here we go, day 1. So let me go ahead and just show you. The first thing I want to show you is the slide that my students are going to see when they first come into class. So let me go and put that up on the screen here for you. Now you notice it's actually the same one I just showed you previously, but let me go a little bit more detail about this. Once again, you have the directions for my students and how I want them to set their paper and what I want them to do. Now looking at this, the importance is on page 2. So that's what I want to emphasize is page 2, because what page 2 is, now if you have the Impact California Social Studies by McGraw-Hill, you can use my slide verbatim. But if not, you may want to locate another resource that shows the map of the world and adjust the slide accordingly. So for me on page 2, it's a map of the world. And what I do with that map is I tell a quick story on how the theory is that humans started in Africa and migrated east, and eventually during the Ice Age they crossed the land bridge to the Americas. But once the Ice Age ended, what you have then is that you have a total isolation from the Americas, from the rest of the world, and that is what I emphasize, is that isolation. Because what I do is from there is I talk about how the civilizations of America developed their own identity and how they turn out to be great civilizations. And we talk about the Mayans, the Aztecs, and so forth. But the emphasis is just how they were separate from the rest of the world and how they developed their own culture and identity. Then once the discussion is over, we move on to the geography packet. Once again, the slides that I have, the geography packet that I created, all that's going to be offered on Teacher Pay Teacher. But in the meantime, before it's up there, if you send me an email, I would gladly send to you what I have for free. Now, the geography packet is a total of 8 pages. The first 5 pages are maps, and the last 3 pages are questions that go along with the maps. First, let me show you what that map looks like for the day one for what we're going to be doing today. So as you can see, it's a real basic map, and the main things I'm looking for is that students can identify the 7 continents and the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. That is it. That is all I need them to understand. That is enough to tell the story about how America began. Then the students will use that map in order to answer questions 1 through 11. So let me go show you what questions 1 through 11 are. Nothing fancy here. Once again, I'm just looking for the 7 continents and those 2 oceans, but I'm also looking for them to practice their skills of using a compass rose. And that goes along with question 10 and 11 when I ask them about directions. So as I'm explaining to students what they're going to be doing, I will display on the screen the directions for the students. So let me show you what that looks like as well. So you see on the left-hand side, it tells students what the possible answers are for questions 1 through 9 and where to look to find the answers. Then, when students are finished answering questions 11 through 9, they will grab their Chromebooks and work on the Edpuzzles, which are on the right-hand side. And in case you're interested, I'm going to include a small little video, maybe a 1-minute recording of me in the classroom doing that discussion part of it. So if you want to see how that plays out, you'll have a first-hand account of it. And then we'll move on to day 2.
And so the belief is that they started here, and of course they started kind of branching out, moving here, but eventually, we're talking over hundreds of thousands of years, they migrated, they moved. Until eventually they started moving this way, they started moving up here. All right? And so, early Europeans, early Asians. But they kept on moving, and what they did is they kept on moving this way. All right? So they moved this way, we're going to say about 30,000 years ago. About 30,000 years ago. So it took, let's someone who's good at math. If we started 200,000 years ago here, and about 30,000 years ago they reached there, how long did it take humans to go from here to here? Someone do the math for me.
All right. Well, I'm glad to say everything went well yesterday. Everything went pretty much as planned yesterday. Students did a good job understanding the instructions. And questions 10 and 11, where they had to use the compass rose, most of them actually got that down. So I was quite happy about that.
That is such good news!
And, well, settle down now. Yeah, I'm not sure it was that great of news, but it definitely was good news. Well, on to today's lesson. So the first thing I want to show you, of course, is the warm-up. Here's the what the warm-up is going to look like when students walk into the class. The focus of today's discussion will be on indigenous civilizations of the Americas. And the map on page 17 is of Spanish explorers, which we're going to use this as a springboard to our conversation. Once we get to the discussion, I'll continue the story of how what happened after people crossed the land bridge into the Americas, and we'll talk about the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, the North American tribes, and mainly how they were independent until the arrival of Christopher Columbus. And we'll talk about his exploration, his travels, what happened with all that, and his interaction with the Native Americans. And that'll set the stage up for tomorrow when we start talking how the European nations started claiming the lands in the Americas, and of course what happened to the Native Americans when that happened. We'll then turn our attention to the geography packet, where students will have to identify those 4 great civilizations, or for example, the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs. And I just wanted to be able to identify where they're at. You can see that here on page 2, where students have to identify those 4 groups. Then we move on to the questions that go along with this map. Students are responsible for answering questions 12 through 16, and question 16 is designed to test a student's ability to use a skill. As the same as yesterday, I'll make sure I display the directions up on the screen as I'm explaining those to the students. When students are done with the map activity for today, they're to move on to the Edpuzzles and just kind of pick up from wherever they left off at. Once again, I'm going to leave a little snippet of the classroom discussion day just so you can see how it looks in my classroom, and then We'll move on to day 3.
That all changed when Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain over here to the Americas. Because what happened, the story of Christopher Columbus goes like this. First of all, he knew the world was round. It's not about, everybody knew the world was round at this point in time. The whole flat thing, that's never true. They knew the world was round. However, they thought the world was a lot smaller because they did not know about any of this. And so what Columbus thought, you know what? I bet that if I travel west, well here, let me put this bigger map here. Because what was going on was this, that the people in Europe is right here, the people in Europe right here, they wanted stuff that people in Asia had, right? They wanted stuff over there. They're trading. But to trade, they would have to go by land, which took a long time, dangerous, and a lot of money.
Day 2 down and on to day 3. Now, just throughout all of this, I'm letting students know that at the end of this unit, there is going to be a test.
Test? There's a test? Yeah.
Of course there's a test. There's always a test. School will not be school without a test. But the test actually is an easy test I give them. They're actually going to be physically outside. I draw a big map of the world, and students will have to move to different places in which I assign them. I'll explain more of that as we get going later on towards the end. But it's kind of fun way to actually test what they remember. But there is a test. All right, well, let's continue. So here's the warm-up students will walk into when they come to the class. So on page 24 is a map of the Columbian Exchange. Now this is perfect for today's discussion. I will quickly recap how Christopher Columbus ran into the Americas, but then from there, something developed called the Columbian Exchange, which, different things were exchanged between both sets of the world. But the bottom line is that these two worlds are now reunited. And then we go on from there to talk about what happened to the Incas and the Aztecs because of the Spanish, and we expand upon that a little bit. But then it all leads up to colonialization, which is going to be the focus of tomorrow's discussion. After discussion, on to the map packet. So on page 3 of the packet is a map of Europe. Now what I want students to be able to identify are the 4 major countries in Europe that colonized the Americas. So we got Great Britain, we got France, we got Spain, and we got Portugal. And along with the map, of course, goes the questions. Questions 17 through 20 are about these 4 countries, and questions 21 and 22 give students the ability to practice their compass skills. Here are the directions I will have posted as I'm giving them the directions. When students are done with the map activity for the day, they are to move on to the ed puzzle. Now, the nice thing is that at this point in time, students are getting pretty comfortable with the flow of the unit. So it's kind of becoming second nature to them. And just in case it's needed, here's a small sample of today's discussion.
When Christopher Columbus ran into the Americas by mistake, he changed everything. Now, once he didn't know he ran into the Americas, he still thought it was the Indies. But after him, other explorers came from Europe, and then they realized 2 brand new continents. And it was at that point in time that these 2 separate worlds once again became reunited. And the first thing they started doing is trading things back and forth. So for example, in the Americas, here's what you have in the Americas. In the Americas, they have things such as potatoes, pumpkins, tobacco, tomatoes, pineapples, turkeys. All those things were only over here in the Americas. Only those things. Everybody over here in Europe, they never ever tasted a pineapple. So we're talking like 600, 700 years ago. Anybody living on this side of the world never tasted a pineapple. They never ate corn before. They never seen a turkey before.
I love this unit. It has a little bit of everything. A little bit of discussion, a little bit of packet work, a little bit of videos.
Balance is key.
Well, thank you, Mr. Miyagi. I agree. It's all about balance. So on to day 4. Well, here's our warm-up that the students are going to see when they come in. On page 47 is a map of the land claims in the Americas in the 1750. And this will be a great springboard to our discussion for today. For the discussion, I focus on how that even though the Native Americans were already here in the Americas and you had all these great civilizations like the Aztecs and Incas, nonetheless, the Europeans started to claim this land as their own. And the effects of it can still be seen today when we look at things such as the languages spoken, how they speak Portuguese in Brazil, Spanish in South America and Mexico, how they speak French in parts of Canada, and how they speak English mainly in the United States. And so once again, these are things that are real tangible to students. So it's a good way of making a connection how even back then, the colonization back then just affects us today just with simple language. And then after discussion, on to the map packet. So in this map packet right here, this page right here, what students have to identify is those European claims in the Americas. And along with the map packet, of course, goes the questions. So here are the questions. For 23 through 26, students have to identify those 4 European nations. And the questions 27, 28 are about direction. And then 29 is regarding which country claimed the most land. And 30, students have to use this scale. So once again, we're trying to incorporate all different aspects of using map skills. And always, I'll have directions posted on the screen for students to follow along with. Regarding the Ed puzzles, if you notice, I staggered them for different due dates and different assigned dates. The idea is to give them enough work to keep busy, but not too much where they get overwhelmed. So the students are really on top of it and move ahead. There's always something for them to do. But the students that are kind of a little slower than the other ones, once again, hopefully I don't overwhelm them with the amount of Ed puzzles. What usually ends up happening is that the last 3 Ed puzzles I will go ahead and count as extra credit. Of course, along with that, there's always exception. Like for example, this week I had a fire drill in one of my periods, so they won't make it as far as the other ones. So instead of for being like the last 3 I would count for extra credit, I might count the last 6 for extra credit. Once again, this will make it fair for everybody. And keeping with the tradition of this video, let me go ahead and include for you the discussion for today.
We got the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, and the British. Those are the ones we're going to focus on, okay? We got the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, and the British. These 4 powerful European nations start dividing up all this land. And that's what I want you to understand, because that sets the groundwork for where we start with United States history. So looking at this, by the way, some interesting things. I think it was this class you pointed it out, right? Think about this for a second. If, for those that have relatives down in Mexico or been to Mexico or know anything about Mexico, what language do they speak in Mexico?
Well, we finally made it to day 5. This is the last day of discussing geography packet and Ed puzzles.
Are we done?
Yes. No.
That's right, this is the last day of work, but we have one more day, which is the quiz, and that's tomorrow. If I haven't mentioned yet, my classes are 50 minutes, so all this kind of fits into a 50-minute time frame. So let's see what the lineup is for today. First thing is our warm-up when students walk into the class. In this one, we're going to revisit those basic map reading skills. So I'm looking for them to define symbol, scale, and cardinal directions. For our discussion, we're finally making that connection between everything that's happened and the 13 English colonies or British colonies. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a map of the British Empire at its greatest or at its largest. And there I'll show how much influence the British Empire had all throughout the world. Once again, the sun never set on the British Empire. And then I'm going to focus their attention on that little sliver in North America is the 13 English colonies. So we kind of went all the way from the beginning, all the way up to colonization, all these European nations colonizing, specifically now we're Great Britain, and specifically the 13 English colonies. And then we're making the connection of how the history of the United States started to begin. I will also include in the discussion triangular trade and slavery, since that's definitely going to be talked about throughout the whole entire school year, is the issue of slavery, how that's been with America since the very beginning, and then how the Civil War was a culmination of that issue of slavery. Then on to the map packet. So here's page 5 of the map packet. The purpose of today's map activity is to help students identify the many countries that were affected by colonialism. For example, you got Brazil, Mexico, Canada, South Africa, India, just to name a few. Students will then answer questions 31 through 50 that have to do with this map. 31 through 43 are basically finding the names of the countries, and then questions 44 through 50 are questions in which students have to interpret the data from all the maps that they have done in the past couple of days. Here are the directions that go along with the map activity. You know, I find that if I don't tell the students which videos are extra credit until the very end of class, students work harder to complete those videos. Also, I noticed most students are a little behind in the videos or a little ahead. I can always change my mind about which ones to count as extra credit or not. Let me show you a little video clip of the discussion for today so you have that as a reference. And then tomorrow, quiz time. Looking forward to that. So England, United Kingdom, England, Great Britain, is this little island right here. All right? So what happened is this little island sent out explorers. All right? English explorers. They explored the world. But then once they explored places, they actually said, you know what? Let's send some people there to actually live. Let's create, here's a word for you, a colony. So what would happen is the British people would send some of their people out to these different parts of the world and create a colony. That means that English people would live in other places in the world and they would create a small little city. And eventually that city would get bigger. Eventually they start claiming more land. So for example, the British sent people over here and they created little cities over here that eventually grew a little bit bigger. Eventually they started claiming more land. Well, today is test day and it's finally time to see if all the hard work has paid off.
Good for a test, huh? Yeah.
Oh, it sure is. But this test is a little different. Let me show you. In fact, let me go outside and show you what we're going to be doing. All right, let me show you what I did here. So basically I just drew a real big outline of the world, excluding Asia and Australia. So let me kind of show you here. So instead of drawing the actual continent itself, I kind of just drew a box. So this blue one right here represents Antarctica. And then if you come over here, we have our compass right here. And then if you continue, we have South America, and that's kind of the red box. And work your way up, we got Mesoamerica, and then over here we got North America. So the idea is this, that students will be in about pairs of 2 or 3, and then I'll give them about 1 minute, I'll give them directions to move to a certain area. So if I said move to the 13 colonies, well, the students would have to move here to North America. Now, if they're exactly there, it's all right, but they would move to North America. If I said Incas, then they would move down here to South America. So they basically just move to the right box, which represents a continent or at least a landmass. Right? Pacific Ocean would be over here. That white line's the equator. And then up here is we have the scale. And so the scale has a measuring tape, and so it tells you 0 to 400 miles, and there's the measuring tape that goes along with that. And then follow the way along here, over here, what we got over here is Europe. So this box right here is Europe, and then finally work your way on down to Africa. And then down here we have our legend, which says the white line is the equator. So once again, kids are in groups of 2 or 3. They'll each have their own paper, and then they'll be given the directions to move to a certain spot. So that is the map that we're going to be working with today. But you know, the problem I ran into, I didn't want all students to go to the same spot at the same time, so they'll actually be given different spots at different times, and I'll explain that. Let me go ahead and go back inside and show you how I'm going to do that. So let me show you how we're going to have students go to different spots by pulling up the 2 worksheets for group 1 and group 2. So I randomly choose a number, and then students have 1 minute to move to a location. But you notice each student has a different location for each number. For example, if I call number 4, group 1 will move to the Atlantic Ocean, and group 2 would move to Europe. There are a total of 12 questions. 8 have to do with the geography, memorizing where different locations are at, and then 4 have to do with those skills, using the compass, using the legend, using the scale, and so forth. But to see the quiz in action, let me show you what that looks like. What a great unit. I really hope you found it informative and entertaining. If you would like other tips and tricks of the trade, just click on one of the links above here and stay zesty.